Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming out today, even if it was just for free cookie and coffee. So I'm your host today for the second day of NASA Talks. My name is Mac Russo. You're probably wondering why I'm up here hosting, because that thought just crossed my mind just now. But Johnny Wynn approached me about a year ago when I just started out here at NASA, and he asked me if I was interested in helping create a speaker series where the use of it is to create leaders and help people navigate their careers intentionally instead of just being blown around in the wind. I'm kind of nervous being up on stage. I'm not going to lie. The last time I was up on stage was back in April during the Safety and Health Days. I don't know how many of you attended Officer Bradley's self-defense seminar, but when I was there, I was introduced to him 5 minutes prior to his presentation, and I actually found out that he works with my mom, who is an Orlando police detective. So knowing that his coworker's son is in attendance, he made sure to tell me that I should take notes and just be present throughout the entire presentation because I don't know what's going to happen. And I thought that was kind of weird because I was already figuring that I was going to stay throughout the entire presentation because I didn't want to be rude and leave midway. He knows my mom. He could tell on me. So the presentation was going great. Everything was going really good, and I'm sitting there in the back row because that's where I usually sit, and he looks around, stops mid-sentence toward the end of his presentation and goes, "Russo, where are you?" And he's looking around the room, scanning the room, trying to make eye contact with me, and I slowly raise my hand because I don't know what's in store for me. I had no idea. I just met this man like 30 minutes earlier. And he says, "Get up on stage right now." So I'm walking slowly up onto the stage, no idea what's going to happen to me at all. And then he proceeds to beat me up in front of all my peers. So thanks, Mom. But yeah, going through that experience kind of made me nervous. So this is my first time back on stage. So if you see me doing any self-defense moves, it's because I'm having mild flashbacks. So this speaker series, for those of you who weren't here last time, we're starting out, the speaker series is formatted into 5 different days. So last week 2 weeks ago was the first day, today will be the second day, and we formatted it so that a senior leader will introduce themselves and the leadership for the future theme of the day, and then they're followed by 4 speakers. So the 4 speakers will come up and talk about their personal lives and their journey along the way to get to where they are today in their careers, and any inspirations that they could pass on to you guys. So once that happens, Madison Tuttle will come up at the very end to talk about social media because she's the lead here at NASA. She's our outreach for the millions of people that follow us on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram. And we'll leave questions at the end of each of the presentations. So before I introduce Jennifer Kuntz to the stage, she is the SMA director, and I am in the SMA community, so I wanted to give some quick safety tips. The exits are where you came in and out the side doors. There's also fire extinguishers there. If there's sudden cabin depressurization, oxygen mask will fall from the ceiling. Make sure you place it on yourself before placing it on your peers. In case of water landing, there's life jackets under each and every one of your seats. Today you're going to be inspired. Today you're going to be motivated. Today you're going to grow. You're going to learn. And I really hope you guys can take some notes down, kind of apply these skills and these stories to your own lives. Maybe you see yourself in these people. Maybe you can help people in these same situations out. And I'm just going to leave the floor open to that. So with our first guest speaker is Jennifer Kuntz, who's the SMA director.
You did good. I will tell your mother. So that's what we moms do. So welcome, everybody. And I know there's a full house because you probably heard, like I did last time, how great this series was. And so you're probably here to do that, and you're also here to probably support your peers and to learn something. So guess what? That's the act of collaboration. So you're here, you want to learn, you want to support, you want to share things. That's how we collaborate among each other. So leadership for the future. So I have an opportunity as leader at KSC to be a part of a senior management team that cares about building our team, which includes our leaders and our employees. And honestly, you're both of those things. So we're all employees and we're all leaders. And so we have a very disciplined and a strategic approach to doing that. And so really the pillars of that leadership for the future are what each of these series are about. Last week they talked about innovation. Today we're going to talk about collaboration. The next week I think is employees, then it's customers, and then it's organizations. So when we talk about collaboration, which is what we're here today, foster effective relationships. So many of you I know, I had to bring a note because I didn't want to mess up an African proverb. I didn't know what that does to you if you misquote it. But if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. I don't know how many people have heard that. I truly believe that. I think the act of collaborating makes us stronger. When I talk in some of my leadership talks, I talk about why is it that the team, excluding the University of Alabama, which is a sore subject for me, so they're not included in this, but why is the team that wins the national championship or the Super Bowl every year not made up of all #1 draft picks or all 5-star athletes? Why isn't that the winner every year, is the best players, the 11 players on the field? That's why I said University of Alabama excluded. Because of collaboration, discretionary energy, diversity of talent among that team, knowing your positions, supporting each other, supporting the quarterback, playing your position on the field, they win a national championship. It's not always just the best players or the #1 draft picks that win the Super Bowl. So we're here today to learn from each other. You're going to learn something from the stories you're going to hear, which is not easy for someone to come up and talk about their story. So I'm really happy to have a full house here to support them. But take that back and learn and then share your story with someone, because you really don't know who you're impacting and learning from along the way. And when you collaborate, you innovate. So you're going to see that all these pillars are connected. And to be effective as Kennedy Space Center, doing all the things that we have on our plate, we're going to launch Commercial Crew. We're going to launch Crew Back. Today, to some people, is a Thursday. To the launch services people, this is the day Icon launches, hopefully. And that's how they'll be able to remember it too. So multi-user spaceport. We've got to collaborate with partners, with each other. So this is a really important and really passionate part of our leadership for the future. And so thank you. And without further ado, I think I bring Mac back on.
So thanks, Jennifer, for introducing collaboration as the topic for today. Yeah. I hope you guys are ready for another Jennifer, this time Jennifer Lane. She has an incredible story, and she talks about her being her true authentic self and how she brings that to work every day. So if everyone could give Jennifer Lane a round of applause.
Thanks. All right. How many of us have a story that we hide so deep down inside of us with such fear of shame and guilt that we refuse to let anybody else see it, because if they do, they might see us for exactly who we are. And that terrifies us. I do. In 2012, I made a decision that saved my life. And not in the theoretical or hypothetical, oh, I just wouldn't be here today type of way. No, I made a decision that I actually believe saved my life. And I don't talk about it. I never talk about it, because at the time, it led me to taking this risk and asking NASA, hey, thank you so much for thinking of me, but maybe you can hire me later, because right now, I've got to go do something for myself, like run 5,000 miles away. And it was crazy. And I'll get into the logistics of it all the years of buildup that led to that moment, but if I just boil it down to one thing, just one simple thing up front, when I made that decision, for the first time in my entire life, I made the decision to learn to love myself. And that changed everything. You see, I believe that leadership and self-care go hand in hand, and that if we don't know how to be comfortable with ourselves, if we can't take care of ourselves, then we can't serve other people as a leader, at least not to our full potential. So leadership starts with how we learn to take care of others, and it ends, or leadership starts with how we learn to take care of ourselves, and it ends with how we learn to take care of others. And leadership always enables collaboration. And I could say a million things about how we could encourage collaboration. I could say to learn to build trust, to learn to motivate others. I could say to learn to live a life of service, both inside these gates and outside of these gates. We don't talk about that. It's equally important. But the first thing I'd rather say is to learn to be great at being you. Because when we get the power to uniquely and unapologetically be ourselves, when we get that courage, it is absolutely transforming in our lives, and it's transforming in the lives of those we lead. And it gives us credibility when it's time for us to invite other people to the table to sit with us. And so my story, like any story, started years before that decision in 2012. I grew up in a small, rural, agricultural, blue-collar town in the South. The most recent census said it was something like 6,500 people spread over a lot of square miles. And when I started trying to think about how to describe this place, the only thing that came to mind to me was that this is the kind of place that accidentally exists in a podcast. Like some ridiculous political murder cover-up story happens there, and then Serial or Up and Vanish comes in and they pick up the story and it's in the headlines. I mean, that is quite literally where I come from, complete with a political murder cover-up story. The first ever African American elected to office in my hometown was killed in his home, killing not just him, but also his family. And despite the fact that the entire town knew who did it, not a single arrest was made. And that was in the 90s. That was in my lifetime. That was a part of me growing up. I lived through that. And so to put it in perspective, when my parents got married, the sheriff in town also owned the appliance/furniture store. And so my mom's 18 years old, and she's just gotten married to my dad, and she hears this at the door, and it's the deputies. And they're holding this wrapped gift, and it's a present from the sheriff, and my parents can have it as long as they sign for it. And so my mom takes the piece of paper, and she's looking it over, and she realizes it's a voter registration form, pre-filled out with the political party of the sheriff already checked in. So my parents literally got a gift for becoming partisan voters. That's where I come from. And I think that perspective is important, because where I come from, there's a lot of work to be done in terms of equality and justice and diversity. And when I was surrounded by that in those really early critical years of my life, I realized I had to make a decision about that. I had to deal with that. I had to decide what my reality was going to be. And for me, that didn't come easy. And so I want you to take a minute to imagine this place. Imagine the people. Imagine the landscape. Imagine what you think the values of this part of the country are. And now imagine being there and being different. Imagine standing out in all of the wrong ways. And you see, that was me. That was my life. You see, I realized years later that I had always grown up sort of learning how to hate myself, like in one way or the other, because before I came out, I learned how horrible gay people were. And when I came out at 14, I was made very aware of how horrible I was. You see, for years of my life, I was told I was going to hell. I was put in therapy to figure out what was wrong with me. I was graded down on my school assignments and told it was because of the personal choices in my life. I was publicly mocked by adults. I had my property vandalized. My parents got called in by their employers to discuss what kind of house could raise a child like me. I got disowned by members of my own family, my own flesh and blood, which was a real mind twist at that age. And all of it was because I was different. I was an other. And a sense of belonging is huge in our lives. We are biologically wired to be in community, and not feeling like I belonged in that community led to all of these emotions of shame and guilt, and the abuse that I experienced there just became my normal, and I accepted it. I thought I deserved it. I didn't think any better of myself. And so I ran away to the largest university in the state, because I thought if I just sat in a room of hundreds of kids in an auditorium, if I went somewhere big, like 35,000 students, kind of big, that maybe for once in my life, I could just put my head down and I could try not to be special and I could just blend in. But blending in didn't fix my problems. I was still broken. I still couldn't accept myself. And in so many ways, I was still mourning the loss of fitting the mold too. Because you see, this is before same-sex marriage was legal, and I didn't have anyone in my life who looked like me, who was where I wanted to be. And all of these ideas of what's fulfilling in life, getting married and having kids and having a worthy career, it seemed completely out of reach to me because I didn't have any examples of those. And so as a result of that, I made the mistake of letting some pretty horrendous people be a big part of my life. And I don't talk about it. I never talk about it because I hate the image of looking weak, and I hate looking like a victim. The Army soldier in me hates looking weak. But the abuse that I experienced in that community just became my normal. And all of those years of looking for approval in people, it just led me looking to approval in someone else, someone really toxic. And I found myself in a 3-year abusive relationship because it felt normal to me, because I accepted the kind of love that I thought I deserved. And when it got bad, when it got really bad, when I realized I wasn't gonna make it out of that relationship alive kind of bad, when I hit absolute rock bottom in my life, I had a wake-up call. And I knew that I had to make some changes, some really big changes very fast. And so I did the only thing I knew how to do. The decision that I made in 2012 was the decision to run. I ran away from that community. I ran away from that relationship. I ran away from my life. And I ran away to the depths of South America and completely immersed myself in an entirely new life, in another language, in another country. I just took 6 months to try to learn how to love myself. And you see, it's kind of amazing. When we take ourselves away from everything we've ever known, when we remove ourselves from those situations, sometimes we find our truth because none of those biases are around us anymore. And so when I ran to South America, it was the first time in my entire life that I just did something for me. I just did something to try to love myself. And so in another country, surrounded by people I didn't know, I just started working through all of these feelings of inadequacy, chipping away one piece of me at the time. And every time I got the courage to like something new about myself, a little piece of me would fall into place. You see, I left as a really shy and quiet, introverted person, and I got really intentional about who I wanted to be because I didn't want to be that person anymore. And so all of these people here in these photographs, they were such a big part of that because it was the first time in my entire life that people just accepted me. They just loved me. They just welcomed me. And I was finally willing to just show up and be seen. And they started putting me back together. And you see, when I came back, I was in a really good place in my personal life. And when I was in a really good place in my personal life, and I got this really great job here in my career, a job that graciously waited on me, something I will always be appreciative of, when I was in a great place, I met someone else who was in a great place. And it was easy, and suddenly it just worked. We could just be in a great place together. And then the Supreme Court said I equally had the right to the pursuit of happiness, and I got engaged, and I got ready to get married, and like a ton of bricks, every single one of those emotions came flooding back because you see, I had to tell my family I was getting married to a woman. And to say it didn't go well would be an understatement. All of those emotions came flooding back as they started ripping pages out of the Bible and mailing them to me and leaving me crying voicemails telling me how horrible I was, or better yet, cornering my then soon-to-be wife at a family event and telling her to get out, that she wasn't welcomed. But you see, this time it was different. This time my worthiness just wasn't on the table for grabs anymore. And so I did what people should never have to do. I looked at people in my family, like my grandparents, and I just said I loved who I was. And I was getting married, and that I didn't want them there, and that they weren't invited. And to top it off, they just weren't invited to be in my life anymore. Because you see, I was finally willing to just show up and be seen. And when I did that, I didn't feel shame or guilt anymore. I just felt disappointment. And disappointment, well, that's an emotion that I can handle. I can handle disappointment. And to a bigger extent, I really wasn't doing it for me anymore. I was doing it for her, my wife, because I knew how unwelcome they made her feel, and I knew how poorly they treated her. And that's that spectrum, learning to take care of ourselves so that we can take care of others. And when my parents and my sister rallied around me, I finally just stopped looking for acceptance in all of those family members that I knew I wasn't going to get it from. Because I knew how toxic that path was. I knew how dark that path was. I had been down that path, and quite literally, it had almost killed me before. And I was finally willing to just show up and be seen. And so in 2015, surrounded by not very many members of my family, but by a lot of friends and the family who counted, I married the most wonderful woman in the world. You see, life had so much more in store for me than I could have ever imagined. But it didn't start until I made the decision to start loving myself. It didn't start until I finally showed up. And at the top here, I went back to Argentina last year, but this time I went with her because it just felt right. It just felt fitting because in so many ways, this is where I was born. This is where I grew up. This is where I decided who I wanted to be. And what I learned from this entire experience, as awful and as beautiful as the entire thing was that for my entire life, I had put my head down and I had tried to fit in, and I had all of this shame and this guilt so deep-seated from my past that I didn't know how to process it all. And so I just tried to blend in. And if I took a guess, there's a little bit of that in all of us. The facade, the fitting in, the wanting approval, the hiding the real parts of us. And here's the irony of that. When we hide who we are so that others can see us for who we are not, we do little, if nothing at all, to empower others feeling safe being who they are. And sometimes it's not about us. And in leadership, it certainly isn't about us. And in the context of collaboration, I can have all of the fancy tools and Google Drives of the world, but if I am not openly inviting a diversity of thought and a diversity of background to the table, if I'm not investing in those around me and building teams of people, real people, who feels free to be, or feels safe to be free and be who they are, then all of the fancy technology can just go out the window because it won't do a thing if I don't start with a human element of collaboration first. And so I learned that pulling up a chair and inviting others to the table meant taking a seat with my own authenticity first. And that's it. That's the spectrum of leadership, learning to take care of ourselves so that we can take care of others. And when we live authentically, we invite others to live authentically, and when we start with vulnerability first, we build trust, and trust builds teams, and teams collaborate, and collaboration brings innovation, and innovation puts people on the moon. Thank you.
That was incredible. Second time hearing it, and still, it touches me every time. I can't believe that she's that brave and true to herself to be able to speak about it openly to an environment like this. So, once again, can we give her applause? And then Are there any questions from the audience?
Feel the obligation to try to help break the ice. So first time I met you, you came and interviewed me to help mentor you for FOL. And you were vulnerable within the first 5 minutes of coming and talking to a GS-15 supervisor. How'd you do that?
Yeah, you know, it's hard because I think honestly, I did that because you started it first. Because the first time I met you, I sat in a room with you, and you just started talking about leadership, and you started talking about your dad, and you got really personal. And when you did that, the next time I saw you, it invited me to do the same. And so it's almost that spectrum of leadership. When you owned it first, it kind of empowered that younger career employee to do the same, to be honest.
So this ain't about me. You're amazing, and that was awesome. And so it's one thing. It's our job to model it, but to model it from every place in the organization is commendable. And you're outstanding, and you did a great job today. So
Thanks, Mark.
Hey, Jennifer, right here. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your story. When you talked about going to college, you described it as, running away to the biggest school in the state. Did you know that that was what you were doing, or did you get that perspective after kind of looking back and realizing oh, I was really just trying to get out? What was that thought process like?
Yeah, no, it was a conscious decision then. I think I knew pretty early on that life kind of existed outside of those walls that I lived in. And I came from one of those towns where everyone grew up there and then stayed there. So my parents had been born there, my grandparents and so forth. And I realized that that I kind of had to get away, that it was gonna take me down with it. And so my one criteria for college was that it was the largest school in the state. I got accepted to other places that I didn't even look at. I just wanted to go somewhere big. So, yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Jennifer. Up next, we have Skylar Kleinschmidt, who's going to talk about his personal career story. And so welcome, Skylar, everyone.
Thank you very much. I don't have any slides. L. 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 Did you hear that? I said to my friend Mike. Yeah, was that a person or an animal maybe? We shrugged at each other and decided to head on down that side street. We roamed pretty freely back in those hot, dry Colorado summer days as kids, roaming the neighborhoods, looking for our friends to try to get them involved in super soaker battles to stay cool and have fun. But tempered with that was always a bit of a warning in the back of our minds that you should have some caution. Sometimes there might be strangers or unusual things going on in the neighborhood that you should be wary of. Yelp, yelp, yelp. There's that sound again. We turned to each other a little nervously. The cops had responded to an attempted abduction just a week ago, a couple streets over. We clutched our super soakers tighter to our chests as if that would offer any protection. We went down the street a little farther, and suddenly what we saw completely changed our expectations. Lying on the ground, help, 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 was an elderly man with an open head wound, and he was profusely bleeding. He was gardening and had slipped and bashed his head open on some rocks. There was no one around, and we had no idea how long he'd been there. Suddenly, this man's life was in our hands. Were we prepared? In the 20 years since then, I've always often wondered and been fascinated at why people make the decisions they make and the experiences that helped get them there. And I hope to share some of my experiences with you all to tell you how I ended up having to make decisions for myself. Before I was a NASA civil servant, let me take you back to when I just graduated college. I had my bachelor's degree in aerospace engineering, and I was all about space, space, space. I was so excited that I had an internship offer from NASA, but I almost didn't take it. You see, I was a little bit blind to the all-encompassing aspect of what goes into space. And here's an internship for communications. That wasn't what was in my classes that I was excited about. I don't know if I want to take this internship. I didn't have anything else on the table, but I was still being picky. I had some sense talked into me, and I drove down from New York to start my internship. I had an amazing summer, of course. I was over in one of the labs at Kennedy Space Center, and I got to build drones all summer, which was one of my hobbies. How cool is that? I also got my first taste of what it's like to build relationships with people and how that can pay dividends later. You see, I didn't really know anyone, and to help break out of my shell, every day for lunch, I would go over to the cafeteria and I would ask to sit down next to someone, and I would just introduce myself and start talking. In this way, I got exposed to a lot of the cool stuff that goes on because I'd be invited to go to lab tours or see different programs and projects that happen. So the internship ended, and I went home to impose on my parents' goodwill for just a couple months while I found a job. After all, who would want to hire me? I had decent grades, and I had this internship with NASA under my belt. A couple months turned into a few months. a few months turned into 10 months, and I couldn't get any jobs. I couldn't get any interviews. My twin sister, Kat, who is, of course, 1 minute older than me, and therefore infinitely more wise than me, had just gotten herself a really cool zookeeping job several months prior, and she gave me some advice that perhaps it was my attitude that could be a problem here. You see, I was approaching this with contempt and arrogance. I was resting my past achievement and more along the lines of sitting back and, what do you have for me? Let's see what I can be picky and choosy about. Rather than, obviously, I was losing out to people who were demonstrating that they had value and passion for the companies that they were applying for. I was fortunately able to internalize this in time for my mentor to call me and let me know of a contractor position that had just opened up. So I applied for that, and I got that job. So I came back to Kennedy Space Center, and I was a contractor as full-time. It was really exciting. I moved back from Colorado to here, but again, I still didn't really know anyone, and I was quickly burning through what was left of my intern stipend. So I had asked my boss for some extra work I could do, and I was assigned a special project for the Office of the Technologist, and that was to go around KSC and collect different technology demonstrations. I got exposed to some really neat things, and what helped me with that is the contacts that I'd made when I was an intern. I had to go and see this robot that can mine lunar regolith and not propel itself across the surface. I was able to see this method for electromagnetic dust repulsion, and I was also exposed to this lighting that would help control the astronauts' sleep patterns on the International Space Station. So being able to get exposed to all that was great. What I lacked in experience, I made it for an enthusiasm and go get 'em. But as it turns out, I was a little bit of a pest. Because I would go to people, I would ask a question, I'd try to get something, I'd go away, and I'd come right back to them. And then I'd go away, and I'd come right back to them. And I was very fortunate that one of my contacts respected me and cared enough about me to help set me straight. So he pulled me aside and gave me some unsolicited feedback. And when you're asking people to do something for you, perhaps it would be a good idea to sit down and think through it and maybe try to do it yourself or follow everything through to its logical conclusion. That way you're not interrupting people who are busy with their day jobs by trying to pull them off for extra tasks. So I'm very grateful that she was able to share that with me, and I try to internalize that as I move forward. I moved on from that role to mechanical design work. Here, I had some exciting problems to face. I was designing hardware for the mobile launcher arms for the SLS's mobile launcher and ground support equipment in the giant vehicle assembly building. It was really fun to do these designs and solve all these problems. You could really get down in the nuts and bolts. I soon learned that in solving my own problems, sometimes I was creating problems for other people. And to any of you who have ever worked in a machine shop or been in manufacturing, you may have heard something like this before, but I would like to say I kind of internalized some of the mechanical design principles with the following. The engineer sat at his drafting board. A wealth of knowledge in his head was stored. Like what can be done to make this sprocket fit for use on a NASA rocket? But above all things, a knack he had of driving gentle technicians mad. Because it amused me to watch the builders fight, I would make the tolerances unforgivingly tight. If I make this perfect body straight, the job ought to come out first rate. And brass would be great for this little gear, but that's much too easy to work, I fear. So just to make the machinist squeal, I'll make them mill it out of tungsten steel. And I'll put these holes that hold the cap down underneath where they can't be tapped. And wouldn't our dear technicians be glad if only it was easy to install at the launch pad? Now if they can make this, it'll just be luck, because it can't be held by dog or chuck, and it can't be planed, and it can't be ground, so I feel my design is unusually sound. Finally, success at last. This damn thing cannot be cast. So naturally, I was crushing it in mechanical design. When I learned to have a bit of a systems level thinking, it helped me a lot, because then I could try to take a step back and look at how my designs fit in the bigger picture. And that was a lesson that was the subject of a lot of back and forth drawing revisions and learning process. I was very fortunate to have found a mentor. I had, at that point, moved over to a software position, and I was working on the models and simulations that were being used to certify the launch control software for SLS. And my mentor had always said that no matter your station in life, it can always be improved by more education. And he convinced me to step outside of my comfort zone and apply for a master's at Johns Hopkins University. I didn't know, but I was signing up for a 2.5-year commitment while working full-time. It was pretty difficult because this is a marathon. It's not something you can just coast by on talent. It's not something you can just knock out of the park in one weekend of heroic effort. This is something you have to put the time in and the effort in. And there were so many points where I had so many obligations. I had extra projects at work. I was doing overtime. I was staying late. I had papers to write. I had homework due. I had midterms to study for. I was missing sleep. I was missing time with friends and family. I had all this pressure building up on me. I just wanted to quit so many times. If I could just get rid of this over here, I'd have so much more space to breathe. But fortunately, when I was weak, I was able to reach out to my friends and my mentors who were able to knock aside my petty excuses and help me push through. And it was incredibly empowering having been able to complete such a long-term task, and also know for myself, when things get hard, that I'm not just gonna quit and give up. I moved on from the software position to a position in the Launch Services Program as an avionics engineer. Through organizations like Launching Leaders and Foundations of Leadership, I had met a lot of people, and one of my contacts had notified me of that job. Here again was paying attention to building relationships and understanding the importance of people paying a dividend again. In the Launch Services Program, I soon moved to a civil servant role with the Office of Safety and Mission Assurance. Here I became a mission assurance engineer, and I was assigned to deal with exciting tasks in liquid propulsion for second stage rocket engines. Space at last! It was very exciting, and within a year of that, I found myself sitting on console for the launch of one of our Atlas V rockets that was carrying one of our missions. The countdown was proceeding nominally, very smooth, no major issues, no anomalies, until T-minus 4 minutes and counting, when of course, we'd a call that there is potentially an issue with the valve in our second stage rocket engine. This is a valve that supplies the helium which controls the propellant valves for the engine, so its failure could mean loss of the mission. Less worse than that would have to be a scrub, where you stand down the mission, everyone goes home, you have to figure out what could be wrong, maybe you actually have to destack the rocket and take it apart to get at this part. So all of a sudden, the eyes of my mission assurance manager and my fellow mission assurance engineers were all on me. And I was able to set my emotions aside and follow my training and focus on the task at hand. I was able to look at the pedigree of this valve and look at all the test data from all the day of testing and ascertain that there actually was no issue with our valve. The other issue was not going to affect it. This enabled my mission assurance manager to clear the team to proceed with the launch. And ultimately, we launched on time successfully. My fellow employees, my colleagues in safety mission assurance ended up voting me for Employee of the Year for that. And I was very grateful, but I sure didn't earn that alone. It was that entire team of people supporting me, supporting each other, the people who'd sat down with me in the months before that to go over the engine schematics, the people who had sat down with me and showed me how to program scripts so that I could see the data that was coming off the rocket. I was recently promoted to Mission Assurance Manager myself, and I'm really excited to be bringing these new skills to bear in a much bigger role, because with Launch Services Program, this is where NASA launches all of its non-crewed scientific robotic payloads, such as telemetry satellites, communications relays, Earth observing, weather watching, satellites to look out into deep space, or robotic explorers to go to new worlds. It's really exciting, and there's a lot that's involved in it. There's a company that's actually building the rocket. There's an organization that's responsible for the spacecraft. We have parts going across the country. Everything has to end up at Kennedy Space Center, put together, tested, integrated, and I have to coordinate a lot of that work now. And I think that the same skills of being able to focus on that task at hand and make decisions that have long-reaching impact and direct what sort of work people need to do have been very useful. Much like that hot, dry Colorado summer day where this old man was lying on the lawn in the soon-to-be triple-digit Colorado heat. His hard-of-hearing wife, just inside, could not hear his cries for help. She was watching TV. I can't imagine what a nightmare situation that must have been. We didn't have time to think or deliberate. We had to act. While Mike went door to door looking for someone with a phone, because this was in an era before cell phones were in everyone's pocket, he was looking for someone to call 911. I was able to help control the bleeding and see if he was going into shock. Soon enough, 911 was called, the paramedics came, and they were able to get him into a stretcher and taken to the hospital, where he needed dozens of staples and so many stitches the doctor stopped counting to sew his head back up. I'm really grateful that Mike and I were there to be able to help him and ultimately have him recover. And I think going back to why we make those decisions and how that influences us going forward, one of the most important things for me was not only helping other people, but being open to receiving help from other people and keeping an open mind. Because whenever I push the bounds of my comfort zone, I found that it's always had massively positive results for me in ways that I never could have expected. Thank you.
Thanks, Skylar, for that. Are there any questions from the audience? Questions? No?
I answered them all already.
You gave a lot of examples. Oh, you want? Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
So Skylar, moving forward with your career here at KSC, what do you see as your biggest challenge moving forward?
My biggest challenge moving forward is going to be, well, all the change going on at Kennedy here. There's a lot of people who are retiring or moving on in their careers, and there's an entire, we're having it in my office especially, an entire new group of people coming in. And I'm no longer that bright-eyed, bushy-tailed young intern who is wondering what launching leaders is and being invited to join it. Now my challenge is to look out for those people who were also in my footsteps and maybe help them out with putting some intention in building their careers as opposed to being a ping pong ball and just wandering around.
Any other questions? No? Well, thanks, Skylar. Oh,
One last one.
Hey, Skylar. I just couldn't help but listening to your talk. You just had all these moments where you had a combination of a mentor helping you to kind of see yourself, but also personal self-reflection that you did from within. Did you learn about that on your own? How did you develop that skill?
One of the most defining moments of my career here at KSC was when I, again, was an intern. I had happened upon, in my meandering, talking to people, the office of my soon-to-be mentor, a guy named James. And he just sat down with me, and I wasn't expecting it, but we had a talk that was almost a couple hours long. And it was just really insightful, and he asked me all these really difficult questions that I didn't know the answer to. And that started a relationship that's lasted many years. And if anyone can find a mentor, I'd say it's one of the best things that ever happened for me.
Any other questions? No? Okay, thanks again, Skylar. Our next speaker is Stephanie Martin, who talks about kind of realizing that moment when you keep pushing yourself to the breaking point, there needs to be a change in your life and how you do things around work or in your at home or in your personal environment. So everyone welcome Stephanie Martin, please.
Hurricane Charlie just hit Arcadia, Florida, which is a town about 35 miles east of our house. The entire church youth group is loading up to help these families clean up and rebuild. And I feel this need to go help these families. But my parents just won't let me go. About that time, I hear a knock on the front door. It was Pastor Bill. He was coming over to check on us since we were all so very close to the center of this storm. He walked in the living room and we all chatted for a little while. And then I shared with him my frustration. I wanted to go help these people, and my parents just wouldn't let me go. He looked me dead in the eye and kind of smiled and said, "Stephanie, I love you, but there's a wheelchair in the corner of that room because you're hurt. You cannot go help these people unless you stay home and take care of yourself and give yourself some time to heal." I should have listened to Pastor Bill a lot sooner. You see, there are times in our lives, there are moments that shape exactly who we are. And these moments can drive us to do some amazing things. But they can also cloud what's really important. Now, I spent my first 2 years at the University of Florida studying constantly because I really wanted to be successful. I had also signed up for the local Rotaract Club and was volunteering in the community. I was leading a public relations team that was creating a campaign for the local radio station. And on top of that, I had started and was managing a nonprofit organization that fed about 200 kids. That all seems reasonable, right? Until I sat in my introduction to journalism class in Weimer Hall. We were on the second floor and the afternoon sun was shining through the windows. I started taking notes pretty quickly as the professor was speaking. And I had about 3 sentences written down when I realized she stopped talking. So I looked up, and that's when it hit me. Her mouth was still moving. I just couldn't hear her. I turned to my friend Alex, who was sitting next to me, and he'd had a whole page of notes and was hurriedly flipping to the next page to keep going. And I only had 3 sentences. I looked back up at the professor, and her mouth was still moving, but I couldn't hear a word. So I told my friend Alex that something was just wrong, and I had to leave. I shakily walked down the stairs of Weimer Hall and out to the bus stop, and I cannot tell you the relief that I felt when I could finally hear those brakes squeal as the bus approached. I called my mom, like any good college student does, and said, "Mom, I need you." And she went, "Well, what's wrong? I thought you had class." So I walked her through exactly what I just experienced in class, and I told her that I was getting on the bus. And she responded with her normal mom checklist. What's wrong? Where are you? Who's around you? What exactly is it that you need right now? So I said, I'm scared, I'm shaky, I'm nauseous, and I feel like I'm going to pass out, but I just need to go home and go to bed. And as you can imagine, my mom, who was a 3-hour drive away, was getting a little nervous. So she stopped me and said, "Okay, Stephanie, the bus drops you off on 34th Street. You have to cross 4 lanes of traffic. Are you able to walk home?" And I responded, "No, I'm not feeling well, but it's okay. I'm going to get off the bus here. I'll make it part way before I probably pass out, but I'll be close enough to home that someone will recognize me and they'll be able to get me home." Obviously, I wasn't thinking clearly, so my mom was even more concerned. And she convinced me that since my roommates weren't home and they were in class too, that I should stop at the bus stop and I should call my apartment complex, who was generous enough to come pick me up, take me home, lock me in my apartment complex until my roommates could come home. It turned out that I was having a stress-induced migraine. That migraine lasted for 7 weeks. I couldn't read, I couldn't drive, and I had to withdraw from all my classes. I felt like a college dropout, someone who couldn't handle it. In reality, I know that I just signed up for too much. I was too worried about doing well in school and taking care of everyone else around me and not concerned about myself. So I made some changes. While I was out of classes that semester, I started going to the gym. I started dedicating time for myself and time for family. I mean, I still kept running a nonprofit, and there were hungry kids. Who can leave hungry kids? But I started trying to make that intentional shift, and it lasted for a little while. Well, I came to NASA when I was 22. I was the youngest person out at the press site, younger than the youngest person by about 10 years, and younger than most everyone else by about 18. And my first few years were amazing. I got to work with every public affairs officer, both here at Kennedy and across the agency. We were working on awe-inspiring missions like the Curiosity rover, the shuttle retirement. I actually got to sit inside the shuttle. I mean, who gets that experience? I was just thrilled, and I would do anything they'd let me. So as a GS9, I was asked to take part in the commercial crew program. So I joined the team that was really looking at those efforts. And not long later, I was actually asked to take the lead of that team. As you can imagine, there were some hurt feelings from folks across the agency that I, as a GS9, had been put in that position. And I took some of those frustrations as doubts in my ability. And those doubts fueled me for the next few years, because although I knew I didn't know everything, and I certainly knew that I wasn't the smartest person in the room, I was not going to let down my team. So I worked hard, harder than I ever had before. Shortly thereafter, we had our first flight test for commercial crew. It was with the Dream Chaser, and we'd been working with the teams at Armstrong and NASA headquarters and Sierra Nevada Corporation to really outline exactly what we would say if the mission went perfectly or if we had some type of a contingency. But we were ready to charge that hill. So the morning of the test, my coworker Rebecca and I got up at about 3 in the morning to leave base housing. We heard coyotes howling as we left, and we saw the most beautiful sunrise rise up behind the Dream Chaser as they finished the connections for the helicopter lift operations. We watched that spacecraft lift up. It went to the drop zone. She came down perfectly, followed that flight to the T, right up until landing, when one of the landing gears couldn't deploy because there was fog in the system. It was time to enact our contingency plan. I called the team back here at Kennedy and at NASA headquarters and had to give them the code. Test complete, send everyone home. We're not putting out products today. You see, we couldn't say much because it was really sensitive. Kevin Rohr, the communications chief at Armstrong, came up to me shortly thereafter and said, "Stephanie, it's time to brief the center director. You're the lead for commercial crew. This one's for you." Again, I'm a GS9. I was nervous. I was scared. At this point, I hadn't even briefed Mr. Cabana, and now I'm briefing someone else's center director. But Kevin encouraged me. This was the right thing to do, and this was mine to take. So he walked me into the center director's suite, where I sat next to the center director, the chief of engineering, and the Sierra Nevada Corporation program manager. Kevin sat just behind him to cheer me on, and we walked him through our plans, and he was happy with it. I am so glad that Kevin challenged me, put me in that position, because it gave me the confidence that I needed to not only do the job, but to feel comfortable to ask for my seat at the table. It was a long 19-hour day, but we put out every statement that we needed to, we responded to all media, and we were able to help Sierra Nevada address all of their employees. So after that very, very long 19-hour day, Rebecca and I drove to LA the next morning, got some rest, and a much-needed massage, might I add. And then we prepared to fly home, because at that point, our goal was to return human spaceflight in 2017. And PIO was not going to be the reason we weren't going to fly. Not that we would be. But we felt like we were part of that mission, and we felt like we had a responsibility to the team to make sure that everything was ready. So we worked hard. We worked with the teams across the commercial crew program, Kennedy, Johnson, NASA headquarters, and with all of our commercial partners, Blue Origin, Boeing, SpaceX, Sierra Nevada, and United Launch Alliance. We felt like we had the A-team, and we kind of did. My colleague Kyle, a little while later, from Johnson, he came to Florida, spent a week with us as we went through all kinds of meetings. Now, Kyle, I have to tell you a little bit about him. He was the lead public affairs officer for the Space Shuttle program. Kyle was also on detail for the Columbia accident. I say this because Kyle knows his stuff. He's a good public affairs officer, and he knows what I don't, the value and importance of work-life balance. You see, Kyle will work until the job is done, but he's not going to hang around for hours later. He'll respond to something at night if he needs to, but he's not going to monitor email all night long. And when Bruce Springsteen comes to town, he's going to be there. When Kyle left that week, he looked me straight in the eyes and said, "You're good, but you need to be careful. You need to slow down or you're going to burn out." And I heard him. I heard exactly what he was saying. But I couldn't be the reason we weren't going to fly. So I felt like we had to work harder. So we worked for 6 years. I worked on Commercial Crew for 6 years, trying to do everything from outlining how we could show these systems being built up to return human spaceflight in an area that it's primarily proprietary because of the competitive nature between Boeing and SpaceX. We looked at how we could showcase training of these astronauts as they prepared for these flights, and we looked at what mission broadcasts should look like. We didn't feel like it should be just a NASA-produced, NASA-only commentator show like we typically have, because we've got this public-private partnership. If we were going to really do the best that we could for the taxpayers and to show this endeavor, we needed to really challenge ourselves to bring NASA, Boeing, and SpaceX to the table to find a way to do broadcasts in a cohesive manner so we didn't have competing shows, but also a way that would bring out the best of all three of us without favoring one approach over another. It was a lot of work. It created a lot of long days. We worked a lot of holidays. We worked a lot of weekends. And most recently, we worked the longest government shutdown in history. But on Friday, March 1st, I walked out of my house at about 8:30 at night, got in the car, and drove into work and spoke with my deputy program manager, Lisa Colorado, the whole drive. And we walked through one final time what we would do if the launch went perfectly, how we would handle a launch scrub, and we one last time reviewed how we would handle a launch failure. We were ready. We've worked on this moment for years, and we were ready. I drove up to the press site that night, and that countdown clock was glowing. NASA SpaceX Demo 1. This was my mission. This is what I have worked so hard for years. I walked out onto the stage that our teams had worked so hard to build out on the press site lawn with a countdown clock below us. The mosquitoes were swarming, but we kind of ignored that because we were in this moment. I heard my producer come over my ear, and he went, "Okay, everyone ready? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Roll the tape. Let's have a great show, everyone." And we did. My counterpart, Shiva, and I, we had a fantastic show. We hit every NASA and SpaceX key message there was. And with about 5 minutes to launch, we were done. So we were able to step off stage, go out into the press site lawn, open up his laptop to follow the flight telemetry, and just soak it in. I held my breath as those 9 Merlin engines ignited and lofted the Crew Dragon to space station. About 6 days later, the Crew Dragon came home, and our mission was complete. I felt so much pride in the work that we have done for years, and it was worth it, until I got sick. And I don't mean a little cold sick. I mean really, really sick. Because you see, I again had been too focused on the job. I'd been ignoring symptoms for about 3 months then of severe chest pain, of ulcers that had developed, because I was too focused on the job. I mean, I vividly remember driving into the press site after our mission had been complete, just crying the whole drive because I was so miserable. So I called a friend and told her exactly what I'd been experiencing. And she reminded me that we have these things called sick days, that I really should have been using them, and that today was the day to use it. So she encouraged me to leave that day and take off the next day and just take care of myself. So I did. And that full day off, I stayed in bed until about 4:30, going over in my mind all of my choices. I kept hearing Pastor Bill say, "Stephanie, you're sick, you're hurt." You see, I'd fractured my pelvis because I was too worried about not being able to keep up with other people that I slipped and fell, and I needed to be in a wheelchair for a couple of months. I had completely ignored everything that I'd learned in college when I overdid it and gave myself migraines because of all the stress that I'd personally induced on myself because of my unrealistic expectations. And I ignored Kyle's advice when I knew it was sound. So I decided in that moment that it was time to make a change. I took the dog for about a half-mile walk when I just stopped dead in my tracks and said, no, today is that day. So I called my supervisor and told him that I needed help. And I am so appreciative that not only he, but our entire leadership team heard me and took me so very seriously. They wanted to talk that night. What can we do right now? Let's meet tomorrow morning. Let's talk through not only what you need in this moment, but how we can help your commercial crew team to make sure that we're not continually doing this, to set them up in this manner. And then let's step back and look at the press site team. And let's look at how we can help make sure people are going to be able to be successful. That's huge. So I made that intentional shift. Today, I'm on a detail in human resources. I'm learning a completely new skill set, really digging into data, which I haven't done much before. And I'm learning for the first time to truly take care of myself and make that an intentional shift in my life. I've learned that if you leave work before 7 or 8 o'clock at night, you can actually go on a date night with your husband on a school night, because you can walk at the beach and have dinner before 10. It's pretty amazing. I've started training for a 5K. The dog goes out running with me, and now my husband's joined in. He goes out for a bike ride, the dog runs beside him, and I jog behind the two of them. And it's kind of wonderful. I feel like a whole new person. But I was the one who did this to myself. I was the one who prioritized everyone else and everything else above myself. I needed to make that intentional shift, and this time it's on me and on my friends to remind me that this is an intentional shift, and this time it needs to stick. So I'll leave you with one thought. Do you guys need to make an intentional shift? Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Are there any questions from the audience? Anyone? No?
Thanks a lot.
Stephanie and I used to work together on crew. When you felt pressures, I'm sure you felt them from every level of management.
Mm-hmm.
Me to Kathy to on the way up. What are things that leadership ought to look out for to see signs of someone pushing too hard?
That's a great question. So I would say there's a lot of pressure throughout the entire system, right? Within a program, within an organization, within the NASA headquarters structure. But I would say that I put the most pressure on myself. So I need to learn to control that. But I would say that my assumption is I showed a lot of signs. I know that I was on my phone, my government phone, constantly, responding to emails. My poor colleagues know that I was voice to texting as I was out with the dog because I just couldn't shut off. So I think those are signs that people around you will see. I think that you can also see it in someone's face. When I get really stressed, I smile a lot because I have to lie to myself that everything's okay, right? Everything's great. So, and I mean, I've had frank conversations that, oh, you look like you're doing great. I'm not, but I'm lying to myself, so it's fine. So I think there are signs, but we all are really focused on trying to get the mission done, so it's hard to sometimes put the brakes on things.
Are there any other questions from the audience?
So you seem like you take a lot of the internal blame on resolving your own issue here. I'm curious if you've had the opportunity to watch somebody else go through this and how you helped them identify and step back more successfully than those that tried to help you get there earlier.
So I'm trying to do that for my team. Sorry, I'm not going to look at you girls. I'll tell Kelvin. So I'm trying to do that for my team. I'm trying to be very open because I think one of the biggest challenges that I experienced was I'm not vulnerable. I don't share a lot of my personal life because I've got a job to do and I'm here to do it, and there's too much work to do before the end of the day. So I don't share a lot about myself. And I think a lot of us may get into that same trap. But when we do that, we don't recognize the signs. And when we're not vulnerable and sharing what we've been through, it's harder for others to realize that they're going through the exact same thing. So in the last 6 to 8 months, I've tried to be much more intentional about being open with at least the closer team that I'm with, to share exactly what decisions I made, to share what I experienced. And I try not to be a mom, but I kind of feel like I'm the mom of the group who goes, hey, you're doing this thing. And if you're not careful, you're going to turn out like me. Nobody wants that.
Any other questions? No? Okay. Thanks again, Stephanie. So our final speaker is Madison Tuttle. She's the social media lead for PX, and she has some really cool skill building, personal story behind her whole entire career so far and her life journey. So welcome Madison Tuttle to the stage, everyone.
For those of you that are here to glean advice from mid-level employees, this will be 15 minutes of disappointment because I've been here for 8 months. But the really cool thing about social media is that by nature it is collaborative. Through social media, we can reach out to our audience and we have that two-way communication that other forms of external communication don't allow us. So before I get into that, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I'm an Emmy Award winner. So last month, I had the absolute privilege of traveling out to Los Angeles for the Emmy Awards with some of my coworkers. To be at the Emmys was such an incredibly surreal experience. I'm so thankful for my team for letting me kind of go along for that journey. I mean, walking the red carpet was absolutely incredible, bumping up with celebrities, and then to win the Emmy on top of all that was amazing. So I go back to my hotel room that night, rip open the curtains, look out at the Los Angeles skyline, and I realize that at age 23, I have peaked. That this is as good as it's gonna get for me. But I was okay with that because growing up in central Iowa, I never imagined that I would be afforded the opportunity to do something like this. So I actually had no intention of ever leaving the state of Iowa. My family has been there for about 150 years, and nobody has left. All of my aunts and uncles and cousins who were like, I'm getting out of this place, I'm going to college somewhere else, I'm gonna go get a job out of state, all of them have come back. And that's not unique. I looked up the census data, and the state of Iowa, its population is 71% homegrown, meaning the people that born there stay, compared to Florida, which is at about 35%. And so I was perfectly fine staying in Iowa. I love it there. So in 2014, I enrolled in my parents' alma mater, Iowa State University, and I started my college career as a music education major. I quickly realized that while I love playing music, I am not that much in love with it that I was going to sit and practice for hours a day. So I went to my academic advisor and I said, so this isn't going to work out for me, but I don't have a backup plan. So she started enrolling me in just a variety of classes, just seeing what I'm interested in. So I went to being, I want to pursue meteorology. No. Sociology. No. Psychology. No. And then I thought I found it. Pre-law. Wrong again. So I go back to my advisor, and at this point, it's in my sophomore year, and I'm like, I have no idea what I want to do. And frankly, I was ready to drop out of college because I needed some time off to figure out what I wanted to do. And she encouraged me to stay, and she said, I'm going to keep putting you in gen eds, we're going to get you out of here, and you're going to have a degree. So she enrolled me in an intro to journalism class and an intro to public relations course. At this point, I was a terrible student, and I will say that my work ethic has greatly improved, but I really did not attend either course for the last 13 weeks of the semester, but I was excelling. I finished both courses with over 100%, and I realized during finals week it was because that material just really clicked with me. I really understood what they were trying to do. So I went back to my advisor triumphantly, and I said, Liz, this is it. I found it. I would like to major in journalism with an emphasis on sports broadcast. And so I went about my day as a journalism major. One of my professors was kind enough to forward an opportunity to me to work with Fox Sports when they came and covered the Iowa State home games. And I am an Iowa State gal through and through. I've had a season ticket since I was like 4. This was perfect. After my first game with Fox Sports, I realized yet again I was wrong and that this is not what I wanted to do. So I went back to my advisor and I said, okay, I'm gonna swap, I'm gonna go over to public relations. And she sat down and she was like, what have you just enjoyed in your life? And I was like, well, I love space. I love space travel. When I was a kid, I wanted to be an astronaut so bad. I would rush home from school, stay up late, get up early, turn on NASA TV, and watch every single shuttle launch that I could. Astronaut Peggy Whitson, who was also born and raised in Central Iowa, my childhood hero. I had her astronaut portrait on my bedroom door, and I'm pretty sure it is still there at my parents' house right now. And I told her that, and she asked, well, have you looked at like science communication? And I was like, I have no idea what that is. So she kind of explained to me that there's this whole field of people who take that complex scientific data and translate it to the general public. And I was like, okay, this was like my aha moment. I know what I want to do now. So I started applying to NASA internships. I actually saw on Twitter that they were taking applications for the summer of 2017. So I put my name in, didn't think I would get it, a small town girl, you know, they're gonna give it to kids at Ivy League schools who already have 6 degrees. And so I get a phone call. They asked if I want to do an interview. I freaked out. I had a friend over and I literally just like shook him because I was so excited. Did the interview, thought it went okay, and they said, you'll know within the next 24 hours. So the next day, I'm at my school's internship career fair because part of our graduate requirement was that you had to have a 400-hour-long internship at some point. I was at the fair, and that's when I got the email that NASA Johnson had selected me for an internship that summer. So like any normal person, I literally ran out of the room, texted everyone I knew, and immediately called my mom and said, I'm going to Houston. And she said, you're joking. And I said, no, they actually offered it to me. So this was really the first experience I'd ever had away from home. I was going to school 45 minutes away in a town that I was already familiar with. So I was nervous about that, but I was also nervous that NASA would not live up to all my dreams and anticipations, but also that when I got there, I was not going to be competent enough to do the work. That would be too challenging for me. I'm very happy to say that I absolutely loved the summer. It was fantastic. And so the minute I got back to school in the fall, I started applying to Pathways internship opportunities. So I applied to one at Johnson. There's an open public affairs position. And then one of my friends forwarded me a link to one at Kennedy. The position description was public information in the arts. And I didn't know what that meant, but I'd already done my USA Jobs application, so I just submitted for that one as well. About a month and a half later, I got a call from Johnson. I was one of the 2 finalists. And those that have gone through Pathways know, I think that year the acceptance rate for Pathways interns was about 3%. And so I knew how fortunate I was to be in that position. So I did the interview, and it was terrible. It was like I'd never had a conversation with another person before. So I immediately knew that I was not going to get it. But honestly, I was okay with that, because for 10 weeks that past summer, I had gotten to live out my childhood dream at NASA. Fast forward to finals week, I get a call from NASA Kennedy HR. They say, you got the job. And I said, what job? Because there was no interview or position description, but I said yes. So I packed up all my stuff, drove about 24 hours from Iowa, and relocated to Florida to start my Pathways internship. Don't tell my friends at Johnson, but it was such a blessing that I didn't get that Johnson internship because Kennedy is the perfect fit for me. The first rocket launch I saw, I knew that I was absolutely hooked on this place and I didn't want to leave. And my coworkers here are excellent. They enable and empower me to do such an incredible and awesome job. So speaking of my job, I do social media all day. Coming into this position, honestly, I thought social media wasn't a big deal, and I thought it was silly they had someone dedicated to doing social media. Again, I was wrong. This really is a full-time job, and social media has a lot of power. Because NASA is a government agency, we aren't allowed to advertise. So we can't put an ad on TV, we can't put something on a billboard. Our external communication is pretty much controlled through social media. Just some examples, this tweet right here, this is silly. I'll admit, but it took off so quickly on Twitter that we crashed that website for hours, and in subsequent days continued to crash the website. For Earth Day, some of our environmental folks let us come out with them just to kind of show how Kennedy Space Center coexists with the wildlife refuge out here. That minute, 15-second video had over 2 million views and the highest retention rate of any sort of story content the agency had ever done. So another thing I found out I was wrong about was I thought I hated math. I actually don't. So one of my favorite parts is digging kind of into the analytics of what we do. I think a lot of people have this misconception that social media is sitting behind a desk and tweeting all day and that's it. That is not the case. For social media to be successful, it has to be strategic. And so when I took over this job, that was one of my main things, was seeing what was working and what wasn't. So this graph here is from the NASA Kennedy Twitter account. The green bars represent just the amount of posts. The yellow line represents engagement, unique engagement. Engagement meaning likes, retweets, etc. So luckily, I operate in an office that gives me a lot of autonomy to have some trial and error to see what's working. Same graph for our Instagram account. So another part of my job is the NASA Social Program. And if you're not familiar with that, essentially every launch and major event, we bring out any general public who wants to apply out to see launch and go behind the scenes. This is probably one of the greatest parts of my job because getting those people out here and just seeing how excited they are to be here, a lot of them are really avid NASA fans, just kind of re-inspires me to remind myself how unique this place really is. Anytime I take a group on top of the mound at Pad 39B, someone cries, like every time, because they are so overwhelmed at the incredible history that this place has. I know personally, when I drive to the press side every day past the Vehicle Assembly Building, I still kind of smile at myself a little bit because I'm still, I think, in shock that I actually work here. So as we kind of continue to return to human spaceflight here in the US and kind of push to the moon and Mars, I want to challenge all of you to start taking part in the discussion that's taken place. From my story, you heard that traditional networking still exists. I wouldn't be here without the connections I made at Johnson Space Center. I wouldn't have been at Johnson Space Center without the connections I made at Iowa State. But what's really cool in the digital landscape right now is discussions about space are taking place every day and more frequently. Some of you may be familiar with Space Twitter. There's a huge community of industry professionals, folks from other nations' space agencies, and NASA folks who are out there sharing the amazing work that they're doing. And I can sit behind a desk all day and tweet about the awesome stuff that we're doing here, but to me what's most impactful is when people can share their stories. Because if I'm sitting back home in Iowa and I see, the story of Peggy Whitson, and she said, you know what, I'm from the same place you are, but look what I can do. And I think that that's really, really powerful because to me, social media is where our younger generation is consuming all of their content. That's where they're reading the news. That's where they're seeing job opportunities. It's all living right there. And to me, that's the most important part of what we do here. I know that a lot of you are from this area or you've been working out here a long time, and I feel that some of that kind of imaginative, oh wow, I work here, is gone. And I would challenge you to kind of think about how you felt the first day you drove through these gates, or how you felt when you saw your first rocket launch, and kind of bring that excitement back, because to me that is incredibly powerful. So if you take nothing else away from this presentation, I want you all to know that your stories are impactful, and that I want to be incredibly involved in telling those stories so we can continue to inspire the next generation. Thank you.
Thanks, Madison. That was great. Are there any questions from the audience?
Hi, Madison.
Hi.
I was wondering, for those of us that communicate with the general public about space, what kinds of things can we do to make the average person feel like they're part of the larger story of space exploration?
Yeah, that's a great question. To me, giving that kind of behind the scenes look that's not like violating any ITAR issues, but showing that, hey, I'm an ordinary person that works here, but I have an extraordinary job. To me, that's what's bring people in, is that kind of personal narrative type story, if that makes sense. So I would recommend, don't be afraid, to share that, hey, we have all this cool stuff, but also like I'm a normal person who gets out of bed every day and comes to work at NASA.
Hi, Madison.
Hi.
I really enjoyed your talk.
Thank you.
I just have a question. I'm not much of a Twitter user, but do you have any vetting that has to go through? Or, does everything have to be approved before you tweet it?
No. Well, caveat. Yes, there's definitely rules and guidelines that I have to follow, and I do follow them religiously, which is why I don't have to get extra approvals.
Question is, tell us about this Grammy.
Oh.
Emmy, sorry.
Yeah, so there's a ton of people involved with that. It was all about our coverage for SpaceX's Demo 1 mission. We were up against, it was 5 late night shows and us, but the award was not only for the broadcast, but for the interactive parts of the broadcast. So that would include stuff like the NASA Social, and during our broadcast, we'll do the #AskNASA questions, where people can submit their questions. So it's kind of all encompassing all the coverage that we did for that mission that we were recognized for. Yeah.
Any other questions?
So Madison,
Yes.
you teased that you've peaked.
Yes.
So I want to challenge you. Have you thought more about what your next adventure, your next challenge might be?
I've definitely thought about it, because to me, I think that NASA is really unique as a government organization, that we share everything that we do, but I think my goal for 2020 is kind of changing up how we are doing it at Kennedy Space Center. I've been digging into the metrics the past couple months and kind of experimenting throughout the year, and seeing that on our accounts, when we take a campaign-focused approach, so if we have a launch week and we take 5 days and all we talk about is that launch, versus when we have a launch week but we're posting about 12 other things that are happening here, we're not getting that same engagement. So kind of continuing with that. The other thing is my colleague Joshua and I are exploring YouTube and creating kind of a behind the scenes YouTube series, because that's where a lot of the younger generation is consuming long form content, and that's a place we're kind of lacking in right now.
Good job, Madison. Thanks
Thank
for
you.
being here. So in March, when Bridenstine was here rolling out the budget, I think all the way up until then, it had always been this very taboo, and legal had put everything out to help remind us about social media and where that balance is. And then Bridenstine's here in the ONC High Bay, and he's like yelling at everybody, get on social media. I think we all sometimes worry about that line of where we're gonna screw up. What's the, if you had one thing that we all need to watch out for, so that we all think about risk leadership and try to do more of it, what's
Right.
the one thing we gotta watch out to make sure we don't do?
I would say something that is really helpful is going to the Kennedy website or going to images.nasa.gov. Like if you want to put out a picture, look and see if there's already one out there that's like that, or look and see if we put out a blog post or a story about what you want to talk about, that's just one way to be careful and make sure that you're not releasing anything that should not be public knowledge yet.
Any other questions? No? Well, thanks again, Madison.
Thank you.
Here it is. So that concludes day 2 of NASA Talks. We really appreciate you guys coming out and listening to all these outstanding speakers. Can they all get a round of applause again?